everybody, this is Lila'Angelique. This is a time-lapse painting of this really fucking weird painting that I made over the last 2.5 weeks. It's definitely the best thing I've ever made. So I start with a background, and I like doing these really weird abstract backgrounds. It's a great way for me to just fill the canvas with something and not have all this blank white space that would overwhelm me. I find that I'm comforted and I'm calmed by the fact that the entire canvas is covered in some kind of color or something. And for those of you who might be wondering, I never have a plan when I start these. As it might seem, I'm just painting intuitively. And I really like doing these abstract base paintings, I guess, for my pieces. That definitely could be the finished piece. But I think that doing that only takes me an hour or something, or less. So then I start just basically painting a doodle. And you can see that I am actually mixing colors onto the canvas itself and finding all these different interesting color combinations showing up. I'm mixing pink with purple, or pink with white, or purple with orange, and all these different colors are showing up. And I don't know what I'm doing at this point. And I'd say in general, during most of the process when I'm painting, I don't know what's happening. But namely at this moment, I'm just being guided by intuition, and I'm just enjoying the process of exploring all of these colors. It's really fun at this point to just experiment with all these interesting colors and shapes and lines, and the feeling of the paintbrush on the canvas. It just feels really good and it's fun. At this point, I got an idea to add a hand to this strange little painting doodle I'd done. So I started adding a hand, and then I added details and shadow, which is kind of the beginning of me starting to conceptualize what the painting is actually going to end up being. And then I started adding another little doodly creature, and I started adding black to the paint, because with the one on the left, I didn't use any black. I mixed white with colors. And then I added another hand in the same style as the one on the left. And then I started conceptualizing an idea as to what the painting actually was, is that these two beings floating together, almost looking like, you know, that classic painting of God and Adam together, basically almost touching hands, but not really. And then I got a flash of inspiration to create some kind of little, maybe planet or being or something, or head or something, that this hand is kind of magically holding. And then I had a great time adding a bunch of doodly details to both little creatures that were starting to come to life. And I was seeing that the one on the left was lighter and the one on the right was darker. And then I got the idea to put some large thing in the center, in the background, to have some large entity of some kind being in the background. That was my idea at the time. There were these two small beings and then something large in the background. Then I did this, I don't know, there was an idea to create some kind of head or alien face of some kind. That was the initial idea when I was working on this part of the center of the painting. And of course I got into doing detail work, which I love doing, and I was mixing colors onto the canvas without mixing them on a anything beforehand, which was really fun. So I would just take white or black and mix it with all sorts of colors or mix colors together. And eventually I was using these bright yellows and oranges, which ended up looking really cool. And so it ended up being this big something, and I didn't know what it was, but I just, with this painting, I'm really embracing my love of details. Because as you can see, I just adore creating weird shapes and interesting, and I love line work. I love working on lines, and I, I try really hard to add shadow to the things that I create. And here is where I'm starting to add maybe the eyes of this creature, because my initial concept was that this was just going to be a floating creature in the center of these two other creatures. So I was adding eyes, and I love painting eyes. This eye I really liked doing, and then I did another eye, and so the whole process was, like I say, I never really know exactly what it is I'm doing and what something is going to end up being. I just go with it, and I can feel that the painting is telling me what it wants to be, if that makes sense. I'm being guided by something. I don't actually know, like when I'm choosing colors, I'm just, I just kind of know. It's not a, it's an intuitive experience. It's not a, I'm planning things out or I know what I'm doing. I had no vision or thought about what this was going to be or what it was going to look like when I started. And I have certain ideas about what a certain aspect of a painting is going to look like when I'm working on it, as opposed to as it continues. And I also am learning to trust that process too. Like these eyes ended up being something that near the end of the painting I got inspired to create as their own little floating entities, which was not my concept when I first was working on it. And then I started working on the creature in the background, and of course adding a ton of details, which I just have so much fun doing. And again, I still don't really know. It's starting to come together more because there are three entities there. They're floating in space. Something is going on, but it still hasn't come together in the way that it really makes sense. And that's, oh, and then here I'm starting to paint hands on these little creatures, which was really fun. As I kept working on it, I was seeing how it would be really cool to have a bunch of different hands, floating kind of around each one of these creatures. And so I was experimenting with different hand positions, and of course I was using pictures of my own hands as inspiration. This hand, I didn't really like how it was coming out, and and then I ended up getting rid of it, and I did another hand, and both of these hands I ended up getting rid of because I didn't really like how they just didn't sit well on the painting. And I needed everything to kind of fold, all the hands to kind of fold into each other and look like they were all swirling around the creatures, if that makes sense. And these were too kind of straight, so I ended up getting rid of it. And it's an interesting process to paint something and then get rid of it. And here's another hand that I did that I think I also got rid of. So the hands up on top on this creature to the right, I had trouble figuring out the position I wanted them to be in. And again, I don't have a plan. I'm just being guided by something. So I'm adding more hands, and the process is very slow and interesting. I find it so curious to have seen the final product and then watching this process video, because it really is, it takes a really long time when I'm painting to actually really come to a space of like, oh, that's what it was supposed to be. That's what I was being guided to create. And all of these hands, for example, I'll have the vision, I guess, to paint a bunch of hands, and then it will take me several days and many hours of sitting for each session. And here's another hand that I did that I had to redo because I didn't like how it was looking. I like when the hands look more flowy, and this one looked, so I was changing the position of it and moving it around. But yeah, I am, I'm not sure about what the piece is going to end up looking like for quite a long time. And I think probably for most of, oh yeah, and then I got rid of both of these hands, which it's always scary to change things in a painting. And it's, I think with this painting it really helped me learn that I can really let go of certain parts of a painting if I don't like it, and it's important for me to get rid of it and change it. And I think that process of removing certain parts of the painting and changing it into something else really helps empower me to not be afraid of. There's no such thing as mistakes, especially with painting, because you can just fucking paint over it, and you can paint over it over and over and over again. And that is what I ended up doing with this painting. I added a lot of layers and experimented a lot with it. And here I'm starting to add, I guess, my version of shadow and shading. Shading is not really my thing. I tend not to shade things very much, or it's something I guess I'm not as skilled at, I guess. Um, I I definitely have a very clear style, which I think I've just developed it over my lifetime. And here I'm adding shadow, just adding black to sections of these little beings. And here it's the being on the right is really starting to look like a creature. Like it's actually starting to look like something. And I think I'm starting to see it as its own entity. And I love adding the black to it and trying to make it look as realistic, I guess, as I can when it is indeed a completely made up entity. With creating from imagination, you really have to kind of work with what you know about reality to create something that isn't real, but can still look real in a certain way. And I loved, as I was adding the black to this creature on the right, that it started to look more and more kind of like it was really there, if that makes sense. That it was really there on the canvas, and it wasn't just. And then here we go with it. Really starts to look like that little tiny circle up above the mouth. It looked like an eye, and so I was inspired to paint a mouth. And I think I'd painted a mouth in a previous painting, so I was confident that I could do this. And I really love drawing mouths. I'm just basically took a photo of my own mouth and then used it as a reference. And I find it interesting that I'm using a picture of my own mouth to paint onto a creature that is completely imaginary. It's definitely at this point starting to come together. This creature on the right I'm really, really liking, so then I'm inspired to then paint a mouth on the creature to the right. And I started to actually see, that these two entities were floating through space and were coming towards this being in the center and kind of coming at them, maybe in a frightening, otherworldly kind of way. And again, this is just a picture of my mouth that I took, and then I'm using it as a reference. And it's such an interesting process to actually paint something as opposed to drawing it. I've been drawing for a really long time, but definitely painting is a different process. Here I'm starting to define all of the hands on the little being to the left. And as I'm working on it, it's really fun to see these creatures come to life and start to, because they're literally just doodles. Literally, they're not. Um, I'm not painting anything that I'm looking at. These are all being done completely from my imagination, which is a completely inspiring process, and something that as I continue to do it, I become more and more confident. So at this point, it really looks like it's coming together, and I could definitely stop at this point and it would could be considered finished. So then I'm looking at this thing in the background and looking at what do I want this thing to be, and I was wanting to darken the background. And here in this moment, I add all these bright colors around these creatures, and it looks like fire. And that's the moment when I got really, really, really inspired. I was like, oh my God, this is these two floating beings from another dimension that are on fire. So I started painting the background black, because my initial intention was to make this entity behind all these creatures into like another entity in the background. But as I was working on it, I realized that the background was actually looking like a more of a void. So I struggled a lot with the fire with the black background, because initially I painted the black behind the fire, and then I started to add black into the details of the outline of this void thing. And I was realizing that it's maybe something that's like breaking apart or something, that it was maybe breaking through this reality to another reality. And then in this painting session, I actually got rid of I actually painted over the fire again. This is this thing of me painting over things and experimenting with doing it in different ways. But I painted over the fire, and then my intention was to paint the whole background of this space black, and then adding the fire later and adding planets. I'd had this vision. I saw, when I was looking at it, I saw these planets, and so I started to paint planets. And it's just me taking circular things that I have around the house, like cups or glasses or whatever, or paint containers, and putting them onto the canvas, and then just basically putting a bunch of paint over it and trying to add shadow and highlight and all of that. But it's not like I know how to paint planets, or I know how to paint a universe, or I know how to paint fire. This is the first time I've done anything like this in my life, so it's all an experiment. I definitely can say I know what I'm doing. Definitely can say that I'm a skilled artist, but I've never done anything like this before, so it's all an experiment. And I'm not looking at anything. I'm not using any references, which is really fun. And it's taken me probably 20 years of drawing to get to this point where I can paint something completely from imagination. And it's something that I've always wanted to be able to do.
Painting is looking
So
really
at this
amazing.
point, I have the
What's going
two
on with
creatures screaming at this creature in the center, with the planets and the stars. And I had painted then I made like little tinier specks for stars, and I had painted stars on top of the planets, and Thoth said you wouldn't see the stars on top of planets. The planets would be in front of the stars, so I had to paint over that. But it was a really interesting process to paint over things and change things and move things around, and realize that I could do that, and it was fine. And whatever I did, see, I still hadn't added the fire back, because I wanted to add all this stuff in the background. But here I go adding the fire again. And so it's starting to really look like a completed piece. But I have this outline thing from the the whatever's going on with it exploding from the void. And I'm wanting to maybe paint a person floating there, and then add a couple more of these guys floating around, and maybe put little mouths on them. I want to make that area look more broken up, so it looks like glass or something. And maybe even draw little humans floating in the hands of each one of these things. And maybe that the person who's floating here is wrapped up by the tentacles there. But like maybe each hand has a small person floating in its hand. Or maybe people are floating all around, I don't know. And then this centerpiece to make it look more like it's exploding. And then it'll be done. This process took a while of adding details around where it's exploding through the basically through this one reality to another reality. I wanted it to look like something was breaking apart, like it was tearing it was tearing through into this void space, and of course it takes a lot longer than just me having the concept of doing that and then actually doing it. It took a long this whole process took a long time to do. It took me several days to just add all these little details and make it look like things are broke, almost like it's glass or something that's breaking. And again, I don't know how to draw something that's breaking apart. I don't know how to paint something that's breaking apart, so it's all just an experiment. And it was really fun, and it started to really come together and look more um, like, I started getting rid of certain parts by painting black over it and cutting things apart and moving things, and um, so it really, and then I added more stars, so it just it, it's really starting to come together. And then I added white all around the outside, so and it really is it's such a so many things going on. It's crazy how that's just how I do. And then I once I got that main center part finished, I was like, I want to have now some little creatures. They're kind of smaller versions of this large thing going on, and it's just painting black and just doodling basically. And that's what painting and drawing really is you have to trust yourself, and you have to just doodle and trust that it's going to turn into something interesting. And again, the more skill you have, the more you're able to actually make it into something that looks like what it is you envisioned it to be. And I think I saw these little black creatures on the bottom as I think I before I started them, I said that they were probably going to have mouths. So then I started painting these red splotches. I took a couple of photos of my mouth in different positions. And it's fun to challenge myself to paint things from different perspectives instead of everything just being straight on. Um, so the first mouth, and it's very interesting also that the process of painting these little mouths was the first one wasn't as good as the ones as I kept going, and it was kind of small, and I made it larger, and but it's for some reason I really enjoy painting. I've always enjoyed painting and drawing um, human characteristics like eyes or hands or mouths or faces or something, but that they're separated. They're like an abstraction. They're separated from a human face or a human body, that it's just a hand kind of floating somewhere. I think I saw this with abstract art and surreal art that I have loved, that any art like that I have loved and enjoyed and appreciated, it had aspects of that where it would have a bunch of eyes floating off in outer space or some mouths floating off somewhere, and it was separated. It was an abstraction from, but you could tell that it was a human mouth or human eyes or human faces. But I've just found that when I take a mouth, or I take a hand, or I take an eye, and I take it away from what, from a human entity, then it really looks quite interesting. And I definitely could have painted mouths that maybe were more non-human mouths. I could have looked at references and maybe painted monster mouths or alien mouths or something, but instead I just painted my own mouth. And I find that really curious because these creatures they're definitely otherworldly beings, but they have human-like traits. They have human mouths, they have human eyes, human hands. And as you can see with the hands, I expanded the fingers a bit to make them look a little more surreal and a little less human. But I do like that about the pieces that I make, is that there are aspects of humanness in them, and yet they are abstractions and they are surreal and alien-like. And for some reason, my work always ends up being very surreal and abstract and alien-like and futuristic and trippy for some reason, even though I'm not doing any drugs or anything. I think somebody said when they were seeing the process of this painting, they said it's amazing that you can do this without being on drugs, which I don't find to be that's surprising, because I think it's just I have that the nature of psychedelicness within my spirit. I am a psychedelic kind of person, I think. I definitely have I think friends of mine have said you don't have to do drugs because you are drugs. I'm a very colorful person, and that is expressed in my art and my creativity. It just happens to be that way. And I think that's true for all artists, is their art is an expression. It's an extension of who they are. So sorry you can't really see this mouth process very well because I'm kind of in the way. But as you see, as I'm painting these mouths, I'm getting better and better and better at painting mouths. So I find that to be a very interesting process of, especially of painting, is that I'm seeing how I'm improving every time I work on the painting, and I am painting for at least 4 or 5 hours every day, because I'm sorry you can't really see this mouth very well, and this is the best mouth that I did of the 5 that I painted. It's the most kind of realistic looking, I guess, and I think it's because I started adding highlight, not just shadow. It's this process of highlight and shadow that really makes something look realistic, I think. I really like that mouth on the right. That's my favorite. So I'm close to the end, and shit, I didn't turn on the record button when I made this little creatures in the center. I love these beings in the center, are my favorite of the whole painting, I think. So I added more oomph to the fire, I guess, just adding another layer of paint to the whole fiery bits. I absolutely adore those little strangely eye-headed beings in the middle, because I wish I'd recorded that process of painting those, but I added. Now they basically kind of have these flowing robes, I guess, that are full of planets and stars, and then I added a bunch of toothy beings at the top and on either side. I really like filling up a canvas as much as I can, which is with as much as I can. It's really hard to leave any section of a painting without anything there. And here, the idea was to make a ground type thing where I could have the idea was to put a bunch of creatures standing, watching in awe and terror this thing descending from the sky. It's something I tend to do often, is making these things floating in the air, and then a bunch of beings below staring up at it in horror or something. I don't know why. That's just what I tend to do. So, but shit, you can't really see this very well, but I just ended up kind of doodling and making this little, I don't know what it is, standing off to one side, and I don't know what it is. Maybe it's observing this cataclysmic event happening, and then I did some clouds, because of course I can't leave any space untouched. And it's, I mean, basically, like a few days before the painting was finished, I saw the things that I wanted to add and needed to add, and then I took several days to add them, and then it was finished.
It's finished.
Look at the clouds.
I'm extremely pleased and proud with this painting. The process was extremely thrilling. I get very attached to my paintings. It's really hard to finish them and let them be finished. But then I just hang them up on my wall. I love the detail. I love the layers. I love the mouths. I love the hands. I don't really know what's going on with it. It's chaotic and crazy, but it was so much fun to do, and I'm so proud of myself how much I've improved. This is literally my 3rd abstract surreal canvas painting. I can't wait to see how things evolve.